Hey everyone, welcome to my live Facebook show today. I know I haven't kind of been around the last couple weeks, so it's very appropriate to today's topic because we are talking about the seventh chapter of the story cycle process and building your epic brand story strategy, and it's called The Road of Trials. So, I mean, that's very appropriate because you cannot believe my March. I know you all have busy Marches, but this one was a little bit crazier than typical. Last time you saw me was a couple weeks ago, and I was actually coming to you live from Telluride, Colorado, where we had just a wonderful spring break week up there with some of our family and some great skiing. And the next week, found myself in Washington, D.C. I'm doing some work with the Air Force out there and helping them with their storytelling. And I was really hoping to come to you live from the Airlie Resort in Warrenton, Virginia, but it just didn't happen. So I apologize for that. And then last week, I was at Social Media Marketing World, my second engagement there. And I got to tell you, we had so much fun. We did a storytelling workshop to kick off. I was one of several workshop presenters at the event, and we had 800 people show up for the Business of Story workshop. And again, I don't think they weren't showing up for me. They were showing up for the content. And storytelling has just absolutely taken off. I think a lot of people that were like the doubting Thomases of it before are gone, or aren't around as much now. And people are really trying to understand, how do I actually and actively use storytelling to cut through the clutter, the cacophony of communication. And I can tell you, in my road of trials in March, I also had just some really incredible meetings. So this week I had Sean Callahan in town from Anecdotes. And Sean was here. They've got a program out of Melbourne, Australia that they've been doing for 13 years. And I am now a certified provider of their program. And what is so cool about it is they are about story spotting and story finding within organizations. So, and they're not talking about the big epic stories. They're talking about the small little anecdotes, moments, experiences people have within an organization that go unheard. I mean, literally, any organization of any size is an untapped mine of story gold. And why is that important? Well, I went to this masterclass with Sean this week, as did a gentleman out of Toronto, Doug Keeley, very brilliant keynote speaker, leadership coach that also uses story. And Doug summed it up best. Why is this important? Why do you care about story if you're a solopreneur or you've got an emerging company or you've got a big organization out here? Well, Doug summed it up best, at least for me, and he gave me this little diagram. He says, stories impact behavior. Collective behavior impact culture, grows culture. Culture drives performance. So therefore, let's simplify that. Stories drive performance. And that was as clear as I've ever heard it. So internally, both Doug and I, his firm went through this, and I studied with Sean on storytelling for sales and storytelling for leadership. And it's a really cool program where we come in for a day, work with your team, and then for 24 weeks after that, your team gets individual emails once a week with a 10 to 15 minute assignment that helps them increase those storytelling muscles of spotting stories within an organization, capturing the stories that they're experiencing, the little anecdotes, the little moments, the aha moments that make such a big difference, and then bringing them together, archiving them in a library that you can use for content marketing, story marketing, you can use to build culture. I mean, it literally is an untapped thing. And I saw this yesterday. So in this big road of trials I've been on all month, it culminated in really one of the most amazing experiences I've had in my storytelling career, and I got to share the stage with Jerry Colangelo. Now, for those of you who don't know who Jerry Colangelo is, he is an absolute community fixture, business fixture here in Arizona. The reason why, he owned and ran the Phoenix Suns for many decades. He brought the Arizona Diamondbacks to town, and then in 4 years was the first startup franchise that wins the World Series within the first 4 years. He helped turn around a Grand Canyon University now from a struggling college into a really amazing program. So this guy has done so much. Well, he's also an excellent business storyteller. We have March Madness in town for Phoenix, in Phoenix this week. So we've got the Final Four, the NCAA basketball Final Four, and OH Partners, an ad agency here in town, brought together 150 of the top marketers and brand thinkers in town and had March Marketing Madness. And they were kind enough. I was honored to be asked to come and present at that. Well, Jerry did the opening, talked about how he actually helped found and build the Chicago Bulls before he came here, and told lots of great stories about that. They had an amazing panel discussion with some really smart people about how do you use social media and digital marketing to get your message across. And then I was fortunate to be able to close the program sharing an hour's worth of storytelling advice. And the thing that I learned both last week in social media marketing world, where I was just completely overwhelmed with the amount of content and the amount of things that are you're recommended to do online to help get your message out, Facebook Live being just one of them. And by the way, Brian Fanzo, thank you so much for your presentation and for being interviewed for the Business of Story podcast. It'll be coming out with Brian and a few others, Peg Fitzpatrick and Ian Clary from Social Media Marketing World. But I was so overwhelmed, I got home and I'm just like, I called up Lisa Leffler, my right arm, and my community builder that helps me bring this all together. And I said, oh my God, I don't think I'm doing any of this very well. How do I get this story out there in all these different channels? And there's only so many hours in the day. I mean, truly a road of trials with this. And it comes down to what they said last week and what I heard in that panel yesterday. Don't let the channels drive your work. Let your stories. What is the purpose that you are in business to help people? What journey are they on? What road of trials are they experiencing? And then how are you there to help them as their mentor or guide on their road so that they can get what they want? And story is really channel agnostic. Forget about the channels for right now. Make sure that you've got your story straight. This big epic brand story strategy that we use for the story cycle process, that's what we use on the hero's journey to help you get this big meta story. And then, as I've learned from Sean and the group at Anecdote out in Melbourne, what are the small little moments, those little pots of gold that you have within your organization, stories that haven't been found, stories that haven't been archived, stories that haven't been told to support your meta story. So it's a great 1-2 punch. Anyways, if you are experiencing what I'm experiencing, and that is digital marketing overload, and oh my God, when do I go on Facebook Live? How do I keep that up? How do I get my podcast? And what about my blog posts? How many times do I need to be on Instagram? Take a deep breath, go back to your story, and let your story indicate anyways, where you need to be telling that story from the perspective of your audience, not from yourself. So today, I want to, after that long diatribe of my crazy road of trials, story cycle process, here we go. We are going to talk about Chapter 6, the journey, where we are on the journey. Now, quick little recap, backstory. If it's your own personal brand influence backstory, then I want you to answer 3 questions, actually 4 questions. You can just kind of fill this in. Where you've been, where are you now, where you're going. But the most important story is, what is it you do as a brand, either a personal brand for influence or a professional big brand? What is it you do better than anybody else? What is your number 1 position in the marketplace? Number 2, who's your hero? Spoiler alert, it's not you at the center of your story. It is your customer. So to make this real easy, put your number 1 customer in that hero's position and then understand what journey they're on so that you can figure out what story you're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about that customer journey here all today. Number 3, disruption. All right, so we're right here in the disruption mode. The call to adventure. What has happened in the marketplace? Or I'm sorry, I missed that. Actually, number 3 is stakes. What's at stake for your customer? What do they stand to gain? And what do they stand to lose? What do they stand to gain, number 1, by adopting your product or service? And what do they stand to lose if they remain in status quo and don't? There's 2 different complete stories there that you have to appreciate and understand and determine where your customer is on their journey so you know which story to tell them as it relates to your brand and how you can help them get what they want. Number 4, disruption. What's happening in the marketplace that you are an answer to, you are responding to, you are helping your audience get what they want on their journey, or maybe you're that disruptive force. So how clever are you out there disrupting the market? You've got a new product or service that nobody's seen before, and you need to get this to this story to your audience. Number 5. Antagonists. Of course, villains, fog, and crevasses. Villains, who is the competition that are out to thwart you, out to take your market share? What are your internal villains, whether it's in your organization or in your head, that is holding you back? Fog. What are the blind spots? What is it that you don't know that you don't know that you need to know in order to be successful? Now, I know that's sort of a catch-22. How do you know what you don't know that you don't know? You just got to get in. You got to write your story. You got to do the digging. And more importantly, what is it that your customers don't know about you? What are their blind spots and fog about you? And what story do you tell them to get them on board? And then finally, the crevasses and all this, what are your performance gaps as it relates to your stories? What promises are you making in your stories that you're not quite delivering on the other end, that you got to close that performance gap through production and efficiency and so forth? And for your customers, what performance gap are they trying to close that you can help them do that through your product or service, and what stories do you tell them in that? All right, number 5, the mentor. This is where you come in. You know, I was walking with Sean and Doug the other day, 2 days ago, over to get some teepee at a famous, or Mexican food at our famous teepee restaurant. And there's a big billboard up there now for Donnelly air conditioning, and they got a Donnelly guy, and he's got this cape on, and it says something to the effect. Actually, I've got it right here. Let me show it to you, because poor Donnelly, I pulled this up in my presentation yesterday because I wanted to show people, here's what you don't do when you're telling your stories. Can you see this? Comfort heroes, let us save the day, Donnelly air conditioning. You see that? Now, what's happening right there is Donnelly is placing themselves at the center of the story. They are the hero. And how does that make you feel as a customer? Oh, I'm a poor damsel in distress. Donnelly is going to come in and save the day. Nobody wants to be in that position. Or I'm the 130-pound weakling on the beach, and someone's kicking sand in my face, and Donnelly is going to show up and save the day. No, that is totally wrong. That does not work anymore. So I want you to think about the mentor. You are the mentor or guide. You're the Obi-Wan Kenobi. You are the Glenda Goodwitch of the North, helping Dorothy get what she wants by aiding her in her process, but not taking her by the hand and showing them everything. Accountability. So, mentor, what's the 3 things I want you to think about? What is the emotional promise people get, they receive by working with you? What is the gift that they receive by working with you? And this goes back to the stories. Don't tell stories about what you make. Tell stories about what you make happen in the lives of your customers. So what is the gift they get? And then, of course, what personality are you using to go to market, and how authentic is in expressing the personality of your brand? Or are you Sybil out there with like 12 different personality traits depending on where they come in and have a touch point with your brand? Brand consistency, brand personality, authenticity is what helps separate you from the rest of the pack. So I know we've covered a lot. We're halfway through the story cycle, this big, overarching, epic architecture that's easy to implement, but gets you thinking about your brand story as an author might. It really starts bringing humanity into your brand story. So today we're on the journey, or the road of trials, as I call it. And I kind of took you through my road of trials this month, and I'm happy that you're still here seeing it. I haven't been as consistent on this, but I will be. I promise you, Brian Fanzo. I promise I'll be back again next week. But here's the thing with the road of trials. And I heard this yesterday. Really smart guy on the panel. Well, the whole panel was smart, but I took a lot away from Tim Washburn. Tim is with Nomadic, a really brilliant, creative digital agency here in Phoenix. And what Tim was talking about in some of his panel discussions is that customer journey. And, you know, I mean, this is a science in and of itself, and I don't proclaim to be a customer journey expert, but what I do know is story is so often left out of that journey. We look at it as a very tactical thing. So I went online and I just grabbed the customer journey map from, this is Leoden. Okay, good stuff here. Yep, good stuff here. You know, it talks about awareness, interest, consideration, purchase, retention, advocacy, and then it certainly shows all the different stuff that you do tactically. How do you execute on this sort of stuff? So get that. So, we're looking at this right now as a PhD might look at it. There's not a lot of humanity in it, and that's okay because it kind of gives us our map of where we want to go. But here's what I would add to this. And I would add it in each case and ask the question of experience. Experience. So when somebody comes and gets first brand awareness, what is that experience? And I want you to think of the experience in two ways, the experience online and off. So if they find you first, if your customers find you first online and they're getting awareness, what is that experience? And by experience, I mean, what stories are they reading or hearing from you? Or what story are you trying to get them to experience? If you start thinking from a story mindset, all of a sudden, your listicles and bullet points and graphs and charts and data go out the window, and you start thinking about what is it that I'm making happen in people's lives? Not what do I make, but what do I make happen? So what is that experience? What are the stories they're telling about me, and what stories do I want to share with them that they'll take away and remember? Here's a really good example of that. Scott Harkey of OH, Owens Harkey, now OH Advertising here in town, they had a dinner for us speakers 2 nights ago, the night before yesterday's Marketing Madness session. And at that dinner, there's a table of a dozen of us, the speakers and some of their dignitaries and whatever. And he leans over and he looks down past 3 or 4 people and he says, "Hey, Parker, you going to tell that story tomorrow?" And I was kind of caught because I didn't know what story he's talking about, nor did I know that Scott had actually seen me in action before. And I go, "Well, what story are you talking about?" He says, "Your wife's Air Force story." And I go, and I was caught again because I've only shared that story literally with the Air Force that I remembered. And I go, "How did you hear about that story?" He goes, "Oh man, it was like 5 or 6 years ago. You were presenting to Add2 here in Phoenix, and I've never forgotten that story." And I'm going, right, that's the first time I pulled that story out. I launched it. I wanted to see what the receptivity was. And here we are all these years later, and he remembers what? He didn't go on and on about the data and the topics within my presentation, but that one story that ignited in him something that he remembered. So I had not planned to put that story in yesterday's presentation, but since he remembered it, I thought it truly underscored the power story. I dropped it in. So why is that important? Well, 6 years ago, Scott Harkey had no idea who I was. I was just another guy speaking to Add2. And what happens? I tell a story, a very personal story about something that happened within our family with my wife, Michelle, and her father, a really great, somewhat famous Air Force pilot. And he remembered that. He didn't remember me. He remembered me as a story guy, but he didn't necessarily remember me as the brand marketing guy, the advertising agency he had at that time and whatever. He remembered the story. So I ask you again, when you were looking for brand awareness and you get into it, what are the stories that you are telling that viscerally connect you to your customer? How do you make that happen? And I go right down the list. So they've got awareness, they've got interest, and there's all different things, online ads, email, PPC, social ads, reviews, to get that from awareness, interest into consideration. But consider the stories. So this is great. This is tactically the channels, how you might execute on it, deliver some content to it. But as you've heard me say a million times, if content is king, storytelling is the kingdom's sorcerer. It's where the magic happens. It's where we actually connect in this world. And as I told the social media marketing group last week, nothing is true in social media marketing or advertising and marketing for that matter, except in the light of connection. And by connection, what I mean is connecting two human beings together. And isn't that the single unit of measurement, whether we know if we're successful or not? So the big question is, how do we make those connections and how do we sustain those connections? Well, I maintain we don't do it online. We don't do it through Facebook. We don't do it through Instagram. We don't do it through that unless we wrap those channels in the stories that we want our audiences to learn about us, to experience, or to demonstrate the empathy we have for them on their story. So go down through this. add experience to every one of these. And now that they're considering and purchasing, what is that experience? Because once you put experience in your vocabulary, you have to think in story. You stop thinking as a tactician and you start thinking as a heartfelt, emotional storyteller. It's not what you make, but what you make happen. Go right through this. So in the story cycle, I keep this real simple. Because again, I am not professing to be a customer journey expert. Greg Chapman, a good friend of mine over in California, is a customer journey expert. And if you want to hear how they approach it, go to Business of Story, our podcast. I had him on about 6 months ago. Brilliant mind around customer service, journey, mapping, and all that. So I want to boil it down to these three things. When you're building your stories, these three content buckets or categories of stories that you want to be able to tell in your customer journey. Brand awareness. I know it's broad, but just overall brand awareness. So think back to those obstacles and antagonists. What do your audiences have to overcome to just become aware of your brand? What are the villains that are standing in their way that are thwarting them to getting, the number one villain is this cacophony of communication that we're all fighting with. So you might answer the question, where do they like to get their information? Is it a LinkedIn? Is it Facebook? Is it Instagram? Maybe it's a combination thereof. Maybe it's speaking engagements to get brand awareness. Where do they like to get their information? How are you going to deliver information to them? And what stories about what they experience about your brand will you deliver? My second category, brand adoption. So we have awareness first and then brand adoption. That's simply that first purchase, saying, all right, you got me. I'm in. I'm on board. I'm going to buy your product or service. I'm going to give it a go. Again, add experience to that. Adoption is kind of that nice experience word anyways. But what are the stories that back up this experience? How do you connect them and how do you start pulling out of them the stories that they're experiencing in this process? This is also a really wonderful way to go story mining and story spotting within your organization. It's a wonderful reason to do that because your people have those kinds of stories from customer service to the folks in the trenches to, hit up the janitor for crying out loud. Find these stories that support your overall brand story that you can share with your customers as they are adopting into your family. They're becoming a part of the family with that first purchase. And then now we've got awareness, we've got adoption, we want to move to brand appreciation. And that to me is marked by simply a second purchase. They're coming back for more. So what does that experience look like? If I go back to the customer journey map here, purchase is adoption, retention is that appreciation part of it, and advocacy is a part of appreciation too, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll talk about that when we come to brand rituals in chapter 10. But I want you to think about now appreciation. How do you level them up so that they're buying? You buy a second, a third, but you start arming them with the stories that they're experiencing out of your brand or triggering stories in their minds by the stories you share with them. Now, again, you're not talking to them in white papers, in listicles, in PowerPoint presentations where all you're leading is with data. You are finding the moments and the events that underscore what that data means in their lives. You're underscoring an event of what you make happen, not what you make. And you can find this within your organizations. You don't have to go outside and go do a bunch of digging. You can find it within your organization, which then will also lead to those customer stories outside of your organization. So those are the three things that I want you to think about when you are thinking about Chapter 7 of the Story Cycle System, and that is brand awareness, brand adoption, brand appreciation. Where is your particular audience on that journey, that trip there, and what stories do you share with them so that you can elicit stories in them or trigger stories in them that connect the two together, connect them with them. Where did I do it? Here it is. Now, of course, you can do all this yourself. You got the notebook here. It's filled with everything that you need to know how to do the story cycle system process for your brand to truly get your brand story straight. You can order your book on businessofstory.com. It's only $45. Believe me, it's the best investment you'll ever make in your brand story. And I'm here to help you too along the way. So if you buy the program, you can just buy it and do it yourself and implement it. And when you do that, would love to hear how it works for you. I've got amazing testimonials of folks of going, oh my God, I am now completely approaching my brand in a whole new way. Or I can also help you with this. You could go online, you order the book, you fill the book out, you send the book to me, and then you set up a session. It could be a 1 or 2 hour session. We do this on Skype. If you happen to be in Phoenix, you can pop in, and I go through and help you pull your story together. And it's really important to be able to do that because you know what? Dentists don't drill their own molars. I have found too, I've got a bevy of experts and consultants around me that help me keep my brand story straight. So I can help you do that. I once worked for a guy, Sandy Peterson, way back in the day when I was first starting out, and I was a writer, and I was writing a bunch of radio spots, and I kept getting kickback. They just weren't working, and he could see that I was getting a little bit downtrodden on this whole thing and kind of bummed. And he said one of the lines that has always resonated with me, and that is, it's hard to be a writer, and it's really easy to be an editor. So think about that. You go through this book, and if it's unclear for you, hire me, bring me on in. I'm happy to be the editor of your brand story strategy. And I'll warn you, I'm also going to hold you accountable, and I'm going to challenge you, because what we so often happen when we're doing our own brand stories is we like to tend to lean towards to being all things to all people. And I'm going to challenge you to absolutely focus your message, so that you stand out and you answer that question that we talked about at the very beginning of the show. And that is, what is it you do better than anybody else? And then number 2, who cares? Who's that audience? Then the rest of it starts playing out as you start pulling your brand story together. So that's my story for today. Thank you for coming on this part of my road of trials throughout March. I say trials only because it's a lot of effort doing lots of different things, but I have been blessed at every step of the way of being surrounded by great people, wonderful family, and beautiful, beautiful locations. I just have nothing to complain about, certainly. I apologize that I've not been around for the last couple of weeks, but I will certainly be back with you next week when we are going to talk about Chapter 8, Step 8 of the story cycle process, and that is success. That is, phone's going off, decline. That is where we take these 3 areas of awareness, adoption, and appreciation that you cover very closely in this particular chapter, and we're going to look at how do you reward success at each one of those steps. As you are sharing your stories, what do you do to demonstrate progress to your customer and show them success so that you continue to bring them into the family of your brand and make them a very important part of it. Join me, by the way, this Sunday. We'll have a new podcast for you. We have the founder and his head of content marketing of the Sock Club. And you're going, socks? What the hell, socks? Well, it is a really fascinating organization. I am now a proud member of Sock Club Socks. I don't know if you can't quite see them there. I'm old. I can't get my foot up that high. But they've done an amazing thing with story marketing. They've been able to take commodities of socks and turn them into this enlightening, empowering garment that you put on, and they're killing it. And they're killing it. Why? Because they do a brilliant job of story marketing. They will be with us on the Business of Story podcast this week on Sunday, and they're going to share with you how story has made all the difference in making Sock Club what it is today and how they go about it. So be sure to tune in to the Business of Story this Sunday for the founder and his head of marketing for the Sock Club. Other than that, great being around you today. Have a wonderful weekend, and story on, my friends. Take care.